The Democrats turn around and say anybody who still believes in their Second Amendment rights, anybody who thinks they're part of this problem. Meanwhile, our audience of Second Amendment rights supporters are all like, if I were there, I would have risked my life to stop this shooter. I would have been Richard Fierro. I would have risked myself to save the lives of the LGBTQ individuals at this nightclub. But that we're not allowed to actually understand that and come together as a society around that. It has to be you being the right are the bad people, and you're responsible for things that have nothing to do. You're responsible for the guy who says he's Jesus and in a computer simulation attacking somebody in his underwear at 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a veteran, Richard Fierro, who was able to help tackle and subdue the mass murdering shooter at the Q nightclub over the weekend. We actually have him explaining how he was able to, in Colorado Springs, tackle this shooter and in doing so likely save lives. There were 5 lives lost, but it could have been, as we know, many more based on how many people were there and the situation, the circumstances they were playing out. But there were a couple of heroes on the scene who stepped up and neutralized the threat. Here is Army veteran Richard Fierro explaining how he did what he did and how he stepped up to save lives. Play clip 1.
I saw the ACU pattern flak vest. And for me, that was like, there's a handle, I'm getting it. So I ran across the room, grabbed the handle, pulled him down, and then started to, I think I went for his gun with him. His rifle flew in front of him. And the young man that tried to jump in there with me, we both either pulled him down or whatever, but he ended up at his head and right next to the AR. And then with the AR, I told him, push the AR, get the AR away from him. The kid pushed the AR. I don't know what his name was. And then I proceeded to take his other weapon, the pistol, and then just start hitting him where I could, but the armor's in the way. And I found a crease between his armor and his head, and I just started wailing away.
In doing so, Clay, this guy saved lives, stopped a mass shooting in progress by grabbing the body armor of the shooter, dragging him to the ground, and finding a place where he could pummel him with his bare hands.
Good for him. And I applaud and believe we should give attention to all of the heroes who stop any sort of crimes like these. Is it just me, Buck, or does it feel like this guy, this shooter's name is being used in the media much less? The reason why I bring that up is the data reflects that many mass shooters are motivated by the fame and notoriety that they get in media coverage. You usually get front page profiles on their whole family, and it feels to me like maybe the light bulb moment is going off and there's less attention now, although maybe I'm going to end up being wrong, but less attention in terms of the name and the notoriety being given to these guys, because that to me is the one thing that those of us with big platforms can work on. We try to do that on the show, not publicize and make famous the shooters unless there's somebody that the authorities are looking for. Hey, this person's on the run. I think that's obviously a different scenario. But in terms of a captured shooter, I don't think we should allow them to be famous.
And so there's the heroes who took down the shooter and saved lives in the process. We just heard from one of them, Richard Fierro, their Army veteran. You know, Clay, the politicization of this, I know that it has now just become what we expect, particularly from Democrats, when it fits a certain narrative. Immediately it turns into this crazy person did a thing and it was awful and horrible. Therefore, because I don't like your politics on some unrelated issues, you better bend the knee and agree to do what we tell you to do, or else you're the reason that this happened. I mean, we talked about stochastic terrorism yesterday. Tucker mentioned it last night on his show as well in the opening monologue. And there really is this effort to try to, to emotionally bludgeon people into submission on things that have nothing to do with an actual act of violence like this. And, you saw this on a very different level, obviously. No one lost their life. I mean, Paul Pelosi is fine. But even after the Paul Pelosi assault, And I know here's an outstanding question that has not been resolved about that. And people have a lot of them. But there are two different law enforcement agencies who have two different stated positions on whether Paul Pelosi answered the door himself or not. That matters. It matters from a security review perspective. It matters from a we should know all the facts and the positioning of this perspective. The more we learned about this guy Dupape, for example, and this just all goes to how violence, the media will it's not just when it fits a narrative, they will mold the narrative. They will form a narrative and then try to use it for political purposes, explicitly political purposes. Dupape was a guy who said he was Jesus, like literally said he was Jesus, lived under a tree, thought he was living in a computer simulation, at one point was a 9/11 truther, I think his like partner / girlfriend was the nudist, but I think he went to some nudist protests. He may not have been committed
to the nudist industry.
I'm not an expert on his nude practices, but I'm just saying, I think that she was more of the. But I mean, he probably did some nudity. Yeah, he's an illegal alien nudist lunatic who thought he was Jesus, lived under a tree, thought he was living in a computer simulation. If they were being honest, what they would do is they would say this is all the hallmarks of somebody with extreme mental illness, likely an extreme level of schizophrenia or some form of personality disorder, and this is a guy who honestly should be in a mental health facility, a criminal mental health facility, but one where he's instead it's he did this and Pizzagate, QAnon, Trump. It's Trump's fault and all of Trump's supporters' fault. They have to be held accountable by voters, which they said this right before the election, for the violence against Paul Pelosi. And we sit here and it's like, the left actually justifies its political violence sometimes. I mean, we could go back and look, we sit here and say, look, what happened to Paul Pelosi is horrible. The guy's he's a senior citizen. He got hit with a hammer. He almost died. It's awful, right? If that was your grandpa, my grandpa, we'd be outraged and we would want justice. And anyway, that's the way the right feels. And honestly, and the way the right feels about the shooting that happened in Colorado Springs is that's heinous and evil. And the Democrats turn around and say anybody who still believes in their Second Amendment rights, anybody who thinks they're part of this problem. Meanwhile, our audience of Second Amendment rights supporters are all like, if I were there, I would have risked my life to stop this shooter. I would have been Richard Fierro. I would have risked myself to save the lives of the LGBTQ individuals at this nightclub. But that we're not allowed to actually understand that and come together as a society around that. It has to be you being the right are the bad people, and you're responsible for things that have nothing to do. You're responsible for the guy who says he's Jesus and in a computer simulation attacking somebody in his underwear at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's our fault.
The stories that disappear are telling. Guy in Waukesha gets in a car, mows through a crowd of all white Christmas celebrants, probably based on his background, clearly mentally ill. But it's also quite clear that he also was racist, right? And that story almost completely disappears.
I mean, what do we call a person who hates white people, who says they hate white people?
I would call them a racist.
Yeah, they're racists. But isn't it fascinating that if you ask someone at CNN, what do you call a person who's not white who says, I hate white people? They'd say, somebody who is dealing with the...
Well, they might make the argument you can't be racist against white people because white people have too much control.
That's what I'm saying. That's the argument.
So that's what they would argue.
They won't say racism.
So that story vanished. And by the way, there are racist white, black, Asian, and Hispanic people. That sentence alone would revolutionize the way we talk about racism. Almost no one on the left would even say it. Let me say it again because it's clear and it's true and you all know it. There are white, black, Asian, and Hispanic racists.
Did you see the woman who was yelled at by an African American woman was the one doing the yelling, and she was yelling at a Asian American woman. This was on video, just went viral this week. That she should. Well, I mean, she was yelling all kinds of. I mean, the worst kinds of racism about the Asian woman's appearance, about how she should eat her dog with her. I mean, just really gross stuff. Not a national news story. It went viral, but not a national news story. Why is that, Clay?
Yep. That's my point. That story, and to your point, how about the kid, and I say kid, I think he was like 22 or 23, in Indiana, who stopped the mass shooting in the mall by dropping the guy almost immediately when he came out and started firing in the food court. I believe it was outside Indianapolis, if I'm not mistaken.
And they thought it was from like 30 yards out, which with a pistol is a damn good shot.
It was an incredible move by him that saved countless lives. Story vanished almost immediately. If they don't fit the prescribed media narrative, then those stories vanish almost instantaneously. And we know this because, look, as bad as the mass shooting was in Colorado, every weekend there are far more people being shot and killed in cities, and they don't even get a blip of media attention. Again, you made the point. I think it's such a good one. If we eliminated every mass shooting in America, which I wish we could do, I would be ecstatic, and I know everybody out there listening would be ecstatic if that happened as well. 99% of murders would still be occurring in this country. So think about what percentage of media attention for violent crime goes to mass shooting as a percentage of the overall violent crime that they represent relative to the massive amounts of violence that we just accept that occurs all over this country, and nobody even blinks or argues, hey, let's stop this.
But there's just also something so disgraceful and underhanded and insidious about every time there is a shooting that the Democrat left anti-Second Amendment, authoritarian libs can manufacture into some kind of assault on everybody on it's you agree with us on all the following issues or you're part of the problem. They do it to immediately defame their political opponents right away. It's not, hey, do we all come together here? Do we all understand how horrible this was? Are we standing in solidarity with the victims in Colorado Springs? They're our fellow human beings, our fellow Americans, our brothers and sisters. Do we get to have that moment as a country? No. It's immediately turned by the left into the right is evil. There would be no guns and no murder if it wasn't for the right. It is your fault. They do this now all the time. Didn't you tell me, I think yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of Waukesha?
Yep.
I didn't see anyone covering the 1-year anniversary of the Waukesha mass murder by vehicle at a Christmas parade.
Yep. You didn't, because, again, the narrative's inconvenient.